I know 2022 seems like a distant memory at this point and that we're already a third of the way through 2023, but I've wanted to make a video ranking all 40 of the games that I played that were released last year. Now, every game on this list I've either finished, completed, or just played enough of to be comfortable in ranking them. There's some big games that I didn't get around to playing yet because of a lack of time, of which I'm sure you'll figure out which ones by the end of the video, or if you want, check the chapters or description to see all the games listed if you wanted to skip over some of these, because there are a lot and I don't imagine most people will want to sit through the whole video in its entirety. So please tell me what games I left off and why it offended you so much and I can explain their absence. Anyway, this is going to be a long one, so I'm going to get started. Hi, I'm Dan Thomas, and here are my top 40 games of 2022. Enjoy. Here's a great way to start off any list, a free-to-play Call of Duty clone where it is already being shut down as of May 2023. The multiplayer is from South Korean developers Smilegate, and even by 2009 standards this would have felt ancient. There are very few maps, everyone uses either one type of machine gun or sniper rifle, and overall it just feels so wooden. The maps are very close quarters, so there can be some element of fun with how fast it is to get kills, although it can lead to a lot of spawn killing. CrossfireX is not good, so just avoid it. What's more disappointing though is that there's a separate paid-for campaign by Remedy Games, of Max Payne and Alan Wake fame. It's actually split into two stories, one of which is available on Game Pass and it feels so dated. You play some army mercenary who gets betrayed or something, I don't know. I finished it, but I was so bored and uninterested during the 3 hours or so it took me to finish. And no, I didn't pay for the second campaign. The AI is some of the dumbest I've experienced in a long time, so it hides this by having endless waves of respawning idiots come out of the same monster closet over and over, making each firefight a tedious slog. As someone who loves Remedy's games, this was such a letdown. This game is exactly what it says on the tin. It simulates what it's like to power wash vehicles or someone's drive. You use the money from completing missions to purchase other power washers, different heads and costumes, which is kind of pointless when it's a first person game. I know there's multiplayer, but I don't really feel like subjecting this tedium to any of my friends, thank you. If this sounds and looks like fun to you, then go right ahead, but as someone who actually has experienced the boredom of power washing in real life, I'd rather not be doing it in my video games too. I played it on Game Pass and that was enough for me, but it is also on PS4 and Switch now with DLC where you power wash Lara Croft's mansion, which is a cool crossover, and also now Midgar from Final Fantasy VII. I do commend Powerwash Simulator for succeeding in what it sets out to do, but I found it unbelievably boring and really not for me. Maybe if they do another crossover with someone like Nintendo and you get to clean up Isle Delfino, I'd like that, but I guess I should just play Mario Sunshine instead. Another game I played on Game Pass, and Memoir Blue is a touching hour-long interactive story about a girl who's an Olympic swimmer and her upbringing with her mum, as she leaves her dad. It's clearly a very deep and personal story to the developer, which is really sweet, but I'm sorry, it's just not all that fun to play through. It's probably partly that the game is clearly designed for either mouse or touch controls, so it's quite cumbersome clicking and dragging objects around with a control stick. Worse though is that it's fairly glitchy, where one chapter just refused to load and another refused to let me interact with anything on screen, both instances resulting in hard game resets to continue. It's by no means a bad experience, and I quite enjoyed how abstract its storytelling was, but I've played other similar style games that hold my attention for longer. Another Game Pass game, but You Suck at Parking has a battle pass, so I don't know why it's just not free to play. I guess because there's some kind of mission-based campaign, but it's very one note where it controls like micro machines, but instead of racing, you guessed it, you park yourself in various spaces in each level. It's fine, but it feels like it should just be a mode in a bigger game, and not something you pay nearly £20 for. The multiplayer can be fun where you race all against the clock to find the sometimes well hidden parking spaces, but there are various rounds which can take a little too long for my liking. The fun is in using the ramps and obstacles to your advantage, but it didn't really hold my attention for more than an hour. Hey, have you played Football Manager before? Because this is just this year's entry into the long-running series. It's also on Game Pass, as it was last year, and it's another one of those. There are some improvements like the inclusion of half-time and full-time team talks, but there are some backward steps like how I can't see the other match scores in real time anymore, and that it pauses the game every time you do a touchline shout. The menus are still god-awful to navigate on Xbox, so I strongly recommend playing the PC or even the mobile version if this kind of game interests you. Obviously it's a game about managing your team, so the focus isn't so much on the animations, which is good because they are pretty shite. I played it online with my friend Steve, who took control of Chelsea whilst I played as Arsenal, and it's pretty fun to be doing it alongside someone. They have the official licenses for the Champions League and Europa League, but unfortunately not the Premiership. Luckily they have the names for the clubs and players, so they're not called West London Blue or North London Red, but the badges and kits are unfortunately generic colours. Can't say I'm that bothered about playing next year's entry either. Hey, have you played Resident Evil 4 and did you love organising your storage to fit in all your ammo, weapons and health items? If yes, then you should play Savouring because it's just that but the whole game. I played it on PS4 but it's also on Xbox and PC, although a Switch version with touchscreen controls would be cool. There are only 40 levels which can be completed in less than 2 hours, but for less than £3 I think it's well worth it. It's also a really easy platinum for all of you trophy hunters. There's a ton of Resident Evil references in the trophy list too, just to further push those copyright infringements because yeah, it's in no way endorsed or made by Capcom. I won't spoil the puzzles, but you get to a point where using certain items to consume or stack becomes essential to completing a level. Pro tip, press square to quickly swap between the item case and box because scrolling back and forth with a control stick can be a little long-winded. One negative though is that pressing the touchpad restarts the puzzle over, which I did a couple of times accidentally, thinking I was playing a real Resident Evil game and trying to close my inventory. So yeah, fun little game that I very much recommend. Available on Steam and Switch, the latter of which is where I played Super Kiwi 64, and it's basically this super short and sweet 3D platformer collectathon from the same single developer as MacBat 64 and Tori 3D. It can be completed in just over an hour, it controls and plays really well, but I'll admit that the platforming is slightly undermined by the ability to endlessly climb the walls with Kiwi's beak attack. It's really fun, but honestly, it feels like a demo or proof of concept. Hey, did you like Wii Sports, a game that came out over 16 years ago and want to play it again but with somehow less intuitive controls, an XP system that only works when you play the spotty online, and less minigames than its sequel, which came out over 13 years ago? Well, Nintendo Switch Sports is for you. But rather than going into why it took so long to add golf and why the local multiplayer rewards you with nothing, I'm instead going to quickly rank the 7 minigames on offer. So yeah, a ranking within a ranking, Inception style. In at number 7 we have football. It's basically a slower, more boring and not fun Rocket League. It even has a similar boost system but has none of the skill or depth. What with this and Metroid Blast Ball, Nintendo really need to stop making bad Rocket League clones. As someone who loves playing the sport in real life, this has none of the appeal of actually playing football. Number 6 is Chambara. I liked swordplay in Wii Sports Resort, but that was mainly due to Speed Slice, where you would cut up random giant fruit and objects. But that's not here, and neither is the single player mode against waves of AI over Woohoo Island. Instead it's just boring one-on-one fights which usually result in endless waggle swinging. It's boring. At number 5 we have volleyball. It can be fun and I like timing my blocks at the net, but that's pretty much it. Badminton is at number 4. I like it. It plays like a slower tennis and it can be fun in the moment, but I don't find myself coming back to it too often over tennis. Third place is bowling. You can't go wrong with bowling, except you somehow can, because even though it's still great, the controls feel stiffer than they were in 2006, so I constantly find myself failing my throws, even though you can see my ball leave my character and head down the lane. I played this with my nan, someone who clicked with the Wii Sports iteration back in the day, but could not successfully throw the ball without this prompt coming up. But hey, I do like the Battle Royale online mode, that's fun. In at second is tennis. Yep, it's certainly tennis and it feels good to swing the racket with better precision than on the Wii, seeing as how it was strangely absent from Resort. I like it here, it's good. So at number 1 is the recently added golf. It's basically the same from Wii Sports Resort, even with the same courses and holes which I already know and enjoy. It does however add online where a bunch of people take their shots at once, which is fun, even though I swear these people are the slowest shot takers ever, so I often find myself waiting around for them to finish the hole, just like real golf. And that's it. A fun enough retread of an old classic, but there's not enough new here. The online often feels half-assed, and it doesn't seem like it did well enough commercially to get any more new major updates. A bit of a disappointment. From supermassive games of Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures anthology series fame, but for me the Quarry isn't as interesting as the former or as tightly paced as the latter. It's roughly 10 to 12 hours long, but it feels so much longer. It takes far too long to get going and none of the characters are likeable throughout. Some of them are so unfazed by what would be incredibly traumatic moments that it completely deflates any tension when someone's hand has been severed is nothing more than a seemingly minor inconvenience. It has some pretty big name actors too, like Ariel Winter, Justice Smith, David Arquette, Lance Hendrickson, and Ted Raimi, but none of them give out standout performances, except maybe Justice Smith, but that's only because he seems half asleep most of the time. I played the PS4 version and it didn't run well at all, with jarring screen transitions, weird pop-in and some of the worst water and fire effects I've seen in years. Oh, and it also crashed the PS4 menu a couple of times for good measure too. For people unaware, it was originally intended for the ill-fated Google Stadia and it really shows. The QTEs are so basic that there are very few environmental interactions to probably compensate for the streaming ability of Stadia, but that's just speculation. However, the story is so goofy, the characters are so weird, and the story branches off into so many unexpected places that I did find some enjoyment playing through it in local multiplayer with my friend Jess. I know she enjoyed it more than I did, but it's still a far cry from how good the original Until Dawn game is. Released all the way back in January on Game Pass, Nobody Saves the World is the latest game from Drinkbox Studios, who are probably most well known for the Guacamelee games. This did later come to PlayStation and Switch, and it's a pretty fun Zelda-like, where the gimmick is to unlock the many weird and uniquely playing characters, my favourite being the horse. I do like this game a fair bit, but it can become a bit mindless after a while. I'm not too fond of the procedurally generated dungeons. Give me bespoke dungeons any day, thank you. As I say, it can be a fun game, but it's definitely one of the developers' weaker games in my opinion. A slight disappointment if you ask me. Scorn is another Game Pass game, but it's unlike anything else on this list in terms of how it looks and plays. The easiest way to describe it is that it's a first-person puzzle game, but visually it's ripped straight out of an H.R. Geiger fever dream, so it looks very alien. It looks equally both beautiful and completely demented. I just love how sick and grotesque everything is. However, the puzzles are often very obtuse, with half of the puzzle just figuring out what it is you're actually supposed to do. Typically, I personally can't stand this kind of obtuse design, as I have no patience, so if you're like me, then I would highly recommend just following a guide to help alleviate any frustrations. Without spoiling too much, the latter half of the game introduces actual combat and it's not good or fun, and the checkpointing is awful, but the game is drenched in so much atmosphere, with one sick scenario being introduced after another, that I couldn't help but continue on to see what disturbing shit the game would throw at me next. Oh, and again, no spoilers, but the ending is the biggest fuck you of an ending I've ever played, and I kind of love it. Evil Dead the game is a real love letter to any die-hard fan of the films. I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm one of them, but I do enjoy them with their quotable dialogue and over-the-top gore, of which this game luckily has both. It's a 4 versus 1 game very similar to the likes of Dead by Daylight. Only issue here is that it's obviously just limited to Evil Dead, and not a variety of horror icons like Dead by Daylight has accumulated over the years. So even though you have a bunch of characters to choose from, you end up just having a team of differently aged Ashes running around quipping to each other, which I guess is awesome in and of itself. And yes, of course, Ash is voiced by the legend that is Bruce Campbell. My biggest issue is that all the characters level up individually and take too long to unlock all of their abilities, so you end up being discouraged swapping characters between matches to get good at any others than the 1 or 2 you're comfortable with. It's a fun game though, especially when playing online with friends, so Ryan and Andy, if you're watching this, then we should probably play some more at some point. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the full title, but basically this is another Taiko Drum Master game from Namco, released on Xbox and Game Pass. There was another Taiko game released on Switch in the same year, but I haven't played it, so I can't speak to its track listing. This is actually the first time I've ever played a Taiko game before, and I've discovered that I'm actually pretty bad at it, but I'm blaming that on having to use an Xbox controller. Maybe if I played using the actual drums from the arcades, then I might be okay, or heck, I would love it if I could plug in my DK bongos. Come on Phil Spencer, where's that GameCube controller adapter at? Anyway, the actual songs. There's some from other Namco games like Pac-Man, Tekken and Katamari Damacy. Some are from non-Namco games like Street Fighter and even Undertale. There's music from anime like Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, Attack on Titan and even the Studio Ghibli films like Castle in the Sky and Spirited Away. There's a bunch of J-pop that I'm completely ignorant to, but there's some English pop covers like I Want You Back and even Wham's Last Christmas. I mean, nothing screams Christmas with the late George Michael like popping balloons at a sushi bar with a sentient drum dressed as a shark. More Xbox Game Pass games here, this time with Trek to Yomi, which to me is best described as a sort of 2.5D linear Ghost of Tsushima. It's very combat focused, which can become a little repetitive and sometimes frustrating, so I handed in my gamer card and dropped the difficulty to easy. But then I kind of lost interest in actually finishing the game. It's by no means bad and it's actually pretty cool, but its biggest appeal is clearly with its aesthetic. I just love the way it looks and sounds. I think it actually nails the Akira Kurosawa vibe better than Ghost of Tsushima in a lot of ways, with it also being structured around a revenge tale after your home village is pillaged and burned to the ground. There are some alternate routes with hidden collectibles and even some satisfying environmental kills. Overall, Trek to Yomi is very stylish, if rather rote depiction of feudal Japan. Here's the latest entry in the Sniper Elite series from Rebellion, who also made the Zombie Army spin-off games, of which I've enjoyed. I've played a couple of the other Sniper Elite games, but this is the first time I've actually ever finished one. Basically, it's more of the same with the super over-the-top skull-smashing and ball-busting Nazi killing. There's some light gun customization, the levels are often very big and sprawling. They're sort of semi-open world where you tackle each objective however you like, making it feel not too dissimilar to the recent Hitman games. There's also online co-op multiplayer, but unless you're playing with an equally stealthy friend, you'll often find yourself being forced out of cover as they set off the alarms for the upteenth time, Steve! Although if anything, the addition of co-op makes the overall game way easier. It's still really fun, turn your brain off whilst you blow Nazis' brains off popcorn fun. I really wanted to like Tunic more than I did. That's not to say I didn't enjoy my time with the game, and it's absolutely incredible that it was largely made by just one guy, but I often found myself more frustrated than I would normally like. I love the look of the game, I love the way it plays like a cute 2D Zelda-like with Metroid-esque level design of unlocking newer areas, but it does play a little too much like Dark Souls for my liking. The stamina meter, the active health drinks, the loss of XP when you die, and mostly the brutal difficulty. I know you can activate a no-fail mode or something at any time, but I don't know, I lost interest in the game before I found out you could even do that. And to be honest, I don't like how much of a cheat that feels anyway. However, my favourite thing about Tunic, other than its look, is the way you learn how to play the game by finding and picking up pages of the game manual itself. It feels like you learn the language of the game as you go, which gave me far too many "oh no way, I had no idea you can do that," or "wait, that's what the flashing thing does?" Not to mention the hidden pathways which are obscured by the camera until you get a new perspective. Tunic is a game I respect immensely, but unfortunately not one I have much patience for. I absolutely love Mario Strikers Charged Football on Wii, so I was so excited to not only see a new entry come to Switch, but to also be by its original developer, Next Level Games. But whilst Battle League Football is probably the best playing of these games, it looks the best, and there's character customization now, it just feels like a very bare bones package. The new gimmick of fusing two pitches together so you have a lava stadium and a haunted stadium in one is nothing more than an aesthetic change. Strikers Charged had environmental hazards for its pitches, and they were much more interesting. As I say, I do think Battle League is the best and most balanced of these games, and I did have a bunch of fun playing through the online leagues with my friend Steve, like we were back in 2007 all over again. But just like the other Mario sports games on Switch, this game just doesn't offer enough content to warrant its price tag. Available on all platforms, but I played Signalis on the Xbox Game Pass, and it's this really cool old school sci-fi horror game. It's a little Resident Evil, a little Silent Hill, but also has a point and click adventure style exploration puzzle design to it too. I really like its 3D pixel art with these cool anime-esque Ghost in the Shell cutscenes, with an overall early PlayStation 1 aesthetic in both design and look. It is also caked in a creepy, unsettling atmosphere, where the CCTV cameras follow your every move and lifeless corpses litter the seemingly abandoned space station. Those corpses aren't lifeless for long though, and before you know it you're conserving ammo and running from room to room, finding pickups as you go. If anything, Signalis maybe sticks too close to its horror roots, and by the end of the game your limited inventory becomes fairly frustrating, especially when the rather obtuse puzzles make you wander the hallways with no ammo because you're carrying every item in the hope that one of them activates the something to progress further. It's also good at keeping you on your toes, especially when the enemies can come back to life after a while, something that completely threw me off guard the first time it happened. If you like old school horror, then you owe it to yourself to play Signalis, because it's up there with the best in class. The original Overwatch is my favourite game released in 2016, but now we're past 2022 and into 2023, we've got Overwatch 2 and the whole game is free to play. Oh boy, what happened? I don't know how Blizzard messed up the sequel so bad, but they managed it, and I'm not even talking about how rough the game was when it launched. So yeah, now that the game has gone free to play, it of course uses a battle pass system, one of which makes unlocking new skins and the like so tedious and unfun. I can't believe I missed loot boxes, but at least in Overwatch 1 you could earn in-game coins through playing the game to buy specific skins you wanted, or achieve certain requirements to get a random spin on something that could be cool, all without spending real money if you wanted to. All that aside though, the only significant changes Blizzard made to Overwatch with the sequel is downgrade from 6v6 to 5v5, and a new game type where you push a robot back and forth. Cool. There's also 3 new characters who are largely forgettable, save for maybe the new healer Kiriko. She's pretty fun, but as healers go, I don't think I'll be picking her over other healers like Lucio, Zenyatta or Moira. The one thing they haven't changed was the controversial role queue. What about the much hyped PvE campaign? You know, one of the main driving points that the sequel led with. Nope, not here, and still no word on when it's happening. This just feels like another update to the original and not a true sequel. In fact, it basically is. Because yeah, you can't even play the original anymore. So even if you don't like any of the new changes, it's not like you can go back and play the old game you know and love. If like me, you own a physical version of Overwatch 1 and put in the disc, it just updates to Overwatch 2. Something that they said they wouldn't do. Yet with all of this said, Overwatch 2 at its core is still a really fun game to play, and honestly a more interesting game to play than most of the other games released in 2022. It just so happens to be my most disappointing game of the year at the same time, because it should have been so much more. Oh boy, from one controversial game to another, except High on Life's issues came after it released and have nothing to do with the game itself. Well, kinda. Yes, I'm sure you've all heard about the awful news surrounding Justin Roiland and how much of a piece of shit human being he's turned out to be, but for better or for worse, I'm just gonna focus on the game, because I actually liked Squanch Games' previous titles, Accounting Plus and Trover Saves the Universe. Yeah, like those, it's very much in the Rick and Morty style of humour, so if you didn't ever like the show, then you probably won't like High on Life either. Luckily, the voices aren't all just just done by Royland this time, as each gun you collect has a different voice, personality and function, as well as featuring cameos from a bunch of people, with my favourite being from the Red Letter Media guys. Basically it's a first person shooter with a bit of exploration, so it's kind of like Halo in its feel on weapons, but you obtain said weapons by defeating the bosses Mega Man style. Then some weapons open up newer areas like Metroid, so it borrows a lot from a lot and somehow comes together in an enjoyable, somewhat cohesive package. Although there's no map and the waypoint marker is terrible at guiding you in the right direction, so I often got lost where the exit or point forward was. Anyway, High on Life is a fun, if flawed game, and Justin Roiland is a sexual predator who no longer is affiliated with the developer. I'm a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan, but I'm an even bigger critic on his games, so understand me when I say that Sonic Frontiers is the best 3D Sonic game in over a decade. Although that's not really saying much when we've only had Lost World and Forces released in that time. I played it on PS5 and thought it ran great at a solid 60 frames per second, even though there's a horrendous amount of popping throughout. I don't care what anyone says, Frontiers borrows heavily from Breath of the Wild. From the beacon markers to the Korok-like creatures you collect, the various puzzles across the world, the Starfall basically being the Blood Moon, the huge titans you must complete to progress the story, and the cyberspace levels basically being this game's equivalent of the Zelda shrines. And that's all fine because they most feel inspired by, not stolen, and they work. I just wish that the cyberspace missions didn't feel like fan-made levels built in a map creator. Actually, knowing the quality of fan-made Sonic games over the years, these don't feel half as good. The story though is kind of whatever, but the character interactions and dialogue are surprisingly good for a modern Sonic game. It's just a shame that Frontiers has one of the worst and most anticlimactic endings I've seen in a long time. And the fact that you need to play on hard difficulty to see it only adds insult to injury. Take nothing away from Frontiers because I actually really like this new direction from the Blue Blur and hope an eventual sequel will only implement and improve on this pretty solid foundation. And hey, I obviously enjoyed it enough to platinum the game as well, so that must say something. Perhaps slightly controversial, but this year's Dark Pictures game The Devil in Me was way more enjoyable than Supermassive's other 2022 release, The Quarry. The premise of the fourth Dark Pictures game is that a group of documentary filmmakers travel to a remote island which has a modern day replica of the serial killer H.H. Holmes' murder castle. H.H. Holmes, for those not aware, was a real life man from the 19th century and known as America's first serial killer. Basically the setup is far more interesting and unique to me than Teen to Another Murder Summer Camp, but without spoiling the ending, I don't think it sticks the landing. Although not many of Supermassive's games do. Unfortunately, I ran into a couple of bugs, but nothing game-breaking, just more immersion-breaking. This one stars Jessie Buckley as Kate, of Fargo and Men fame, as well as Paul Kaye as the voice of Charlie, known from Game of Thrones and Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. There are a lot of elements here from the films Psycho and Saw, with the game playing mostly the same as the other Dark Pictures games, albeit with more emphasis on inventory management and mixing things up a little bit. My favourite part is where you wander these ever-shifting halls in the pitch black, with only your character's sound equipment to guide you, as you hear all sorts of creepy noises in different directions. Definitely play this one with headphones if you can. TMNT Shredder's Revenge is possibly my favourite beat 'em up to date, or at least one of. First off, the pixel art and animation are impeccable, as too are the wonderfully animated cutscenes. The banging soundtrack is composed by T-Lopes of Sonic Mania fame, and not only can you play as all four turtles online with friends, but you can have up to 6 players, so there's also playable Splinter, April, and Casey Jones too to fill out the roster. I unfortunately haven't got the chance to play with 5 others, I've heard it's carnage, but I did have a blast playing through the story with Alex and Liam online. If you're a Turtles fan, then this is a must play. Published by Playtonic Games of Yooka-Laylee fame, Lil Gator Game is essentially another Zelda Breath of the Wild like, only you play as this adorably cute gator. It has the climbing, it has the stamina meter, it has the gliding, it has the open world, and it even has shield surfing. The big difference is that even though you have a sword, there are no actual enemies, as the enemies are static cardboard cutouts, making it feel like a child's playground. Lil Gator also feels somewhat inspired by Animal Crossing 2, with you meeting the island's cute inhabitants and doing chores or quests for them, so they join your ever-growing town. It very much feels like a short hike too, but on a bigger scale. My only real gripe is the lack of map or quest log, so I often find myself losing my bearings and lose track of what quest is what and where to turn each one in. That said, Lil Gator Game is honestly one of the most charming games of the year. I just love how your little gator dangles her legs when you glide around. I definitely recommend it for all Switch owners with a heart. Probably the most unique game on this list, even though I hear the cry from some that Immortality isn't a game. I say shut up. This is the latest video hopping adventure from Sam Barlow, the guy behind Her Story and Telling Lies. I didn't play the latter, but I loved the former. Immortality is more of the same. We are sifting through video footage to uncover the true story. You'll be pausing, clicking on interesting events, objects and people, unlocking more clips out of order, eventually putting them together to form the bigger picture. The main premise of Immortality being that you're discovering 3 lost movies all starring an actress actress called Marissa, played fantastically by Manon Gage. As you piece together the behind the scenes footage as well as clips from all three films, those being Ambrosio from 1968, Minsky from 1970, and two of everything from 1999. But why weren't they ever released? Why did Marissa disappear from acting for nearly 30 years? And why in those 30 years has she barely aged? There's definitely more of a horror element going on here too, with some scenes and discoveries genuinely unnerving me. This is definitely an adult story, but not just in the violence and nudity, because there's plenty of both, but even in fully understanding the deeper meaning behind it all. Technically the game isn't great on Xbox, a few times the sound will cut out, so I had to pause and resume to get it to play again. It also crashed on me during the ending, resulting in me losing about an hour's progress. I initially thought the game was being all meta, but no, it just crashed. I won't spoil the conclusion, but I think I still prefer the simplicity of her story, but Immortality got way more under my skin than I was expecting and will stay with me for a while yet. Available on PC and Xbox, Sommerville was the latest game from one of the co-founders of Playdead, the developers of Limbo and Inside. This is very much in the vein of those two games, particularly Inside in looks and playstyle, but Sommerville has much more of a sci-fi twist. It's very War of the Worlds inspired. There are also hints of another world in its design, with adventure game-esque puzzles. Without spoiling too much, the main gimmick is how you can manipulate the alien matter to help you solve a bunch of environmental puzzles. Some can be fairly obtuse and somewhat annoying to figure out at times, so Sommerville can be a little more frustrating than Inside, but it's no less captivating. The visuals can be really striking at times. I really like the painterly art direction. I don't really want to say much more in case I give away too much, just that it's on Game Pass. I thoroughly recommend it to fans of Inside and Little Nightmares, and that not enough people talked about it. Coming from Asobo Studio, makers of Microsoft Flight Simulator, A Plague Tale Requiem is the sequel to 2019's A Plague Tale Innocence, and it continues right where that game left off, as you resume control of siblings Amicia and Hugo de Rune. The best way to describe these games is French medieval The Last of Us, but instead of fatherly bond you form with your companion, you have a sisterly one, and instead of clickers you have a huge plague caused by an ocean of rats. The first game prided itself on its rat tech, and Requiem only expands on the amount on screen, with thousands of rats taking down entire buildings. It looks pretty good. Some of the rat chase sequences are very Uncharted-esque, with some really cool spectacles. Tonally it's comically dark at times, but the Plague Tale games treats its story super seriously, with none of the subtlety of something like The Last of Us. And yet it's still an enjoyable 20-hour game, which kept me invested throughout, focusing more on stealth as Amicia is far less capable in combat than Joel or Ellie. That is counteracted with Hugo being able to control swarms of rats, which can charge and insta-kill any unexpected guards without a light. It's these moments of levity I love, by giving the power fantasy against the group of guards right after struggling to get past one or two, and it's great. Another Game Pass game I played on Xbox, but Metal Hellsinger is also on PlayStation if you're interested. This is basically Doom 2016, but you shoot the beat of the music to increase your score multiplier and thus do more damage to enemies. Your crosshair also displays a timing metronome to help with keeping to the rhythm of the music, but I found that just listening to the beat with headphones on was much better than visually trying to time any shots. The brilliant metal soundtrack is done by Two Feathers, who also worked on Warhammer Vermintide 2, League of Legends, and Angry Birds 2. Wait, what? The story is narrated by Troy Baker, but you're not here for the story. You're here to blast the demons, and through the 9 levels you'll certainly be doing a lot of that. You have a very Doom 2016-esque finisher to get health back. You power up each weapon for an alternate fire, so the shotgun blasts out a fireball and the pistols create a limited decoyed copy of yourself. Once it clicks, and it took me a while, it became super cathartic when you go into a zen-like mode and lay waste to everything around you. The only negatives being the pace-breaking shield enemies, and that every level finishes with a slight variation on the same boss. Oh, and the final boss is a huge difficulty spike which makes you restart the entire stage again if you lose all of your lives. That aside though, Metal Hellsinger is still a rip-roaring good time. What's there to say about Elden Ring that hasn't already been said? Well, that as great of a game as it is, it never fully clicked with me. I did however love exploring the world, discovering all of the bonkers set pieces and unlocking all of the fast travel points. It's the sort of game you can easily get lost in, but in a good way. When you think you've uncovered a fair amount of the map and then you realise there's so much more. And then there's a whole other separate map underground as well. I mean, the environments look incredible, the art direction is impeccable. I've put about 30 hours into the game and feel like I've barely scratched the surface, because I know 30 hours sounds pitiful compared to most people. I probably won't ever beat Elden Ring, and I'm okay with that, because I did enjoy my time with it, but I'm also okay to move on to other less stressful games. The thing is, I'm just terrible at the combat, so I always stay as far back as possible and spam the magic attacks. That works for some fights, like Godric here, but so-called easy fights like this huge grizzly bear handed my arse on a platter more times than I care to admit. Without summons, I would have given up on Elden Ring a long time ago, but that sense of triumph when you finally do take down a boss you've spent hours fighting is unmatched. Elden Ring might not have fully clicked with me like it did for others, else, but it's the most I've ever enjoyed a From Software game, and I can admit a great game when I see one. Just, I would prefer if it stopped killing me every 5 minutes. Thank you. Say what you will about this broken mess of a game, but I somehow put over 85 hours into Pokémon Scarlet. I know I'm part of the problem and there's no way it should have been released in this state, but finally making Pokémon truly open world really does work and breathe new life into this franchise. It's just a shame that it's at such a detriment to performance. The story is largely forgettable until like 80% of the way through the game, and then it actually takes a twist that I wasn't expecting, but was completely there for. I do like a lot of the new Pokémon, especially some of the new takes on older mons. The new Terraform is this generation's new gimmick, and while it creates a bunch of interesting battle strategies, I think aesthetically it's kind of lame and has nothing on Mega Evolution or even Gigantamax battles from Sword and Shield. I honestly feel guilty for putting so many hours into this bought game, but despite all of the glitches, performance issues, and general lack of polish, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet at their core are still really fun and somewhat fresh feeling games. Now we're into the top 10 with my first and only VR game on the list. Moss Book 2 is a sequel to 2018's Moss, and a game barely anyone played because no one was playing the now outdated PlayStation VR in 2022. I did though, and it's one of my favourite games of the year. Book 2 starts right off from where the first one ended, so much so that everything about its first hour just feels like glorified DLC. Even having the same church at the start, where you read the book of the game you're playing. Before long though, you're leaving the well-trodden castle ruins and exploring dense swamps, lush greenhouses and snowy mountaintops. Your adorable little mouse Quill learns new climbing moves and attacks, with you the player back as the ghostly entity called the Reader, where you can now create vines and bridges for Quill to cross. There's also a proper hub world this time, and Quill isn't the only mouse you end up controlling. I feel like I say this with any VR game, but a sense of scale can never be justified in a flat 2D screen here, and Moss Book 2 is absolutely wonderful at creating this seemingly huge world around you. This toad looks absolutely terrifying when it's blown up in your face in VR. What starts out as just more moss quickly turns into one of my favourite PSVR games the system has to offer. Just look at how cute this fucking mouse is. Here we have another Doom-like in Prodeus. It was in early access for a couple of years, but it finally got released in 2022, and on Game Pass no less, although it's also available on PS4 and Switch. So yeah, Prodeus is unapologetically Doom, but more brutal Doom, as there's fountains of blood everywhere with every kill. I love its low poly pixel art look, but with that high-res lighting. To me it looks like a cross between the sharpness of Doom 2016 and the grungy undertones of Doom 64. The levels do become more involved as you go along, borrowing from the verticality of Quake, but never straying too far from what makes a level fun or too long. Very rarely was I ever lost on what to do or where to go next. Prodeus is all about moving from room to room and shooting everything that moves. And luckily the shooting is incredibly punchy. You collect pieces of ore throughout the levels, which can be used in the shop to purchase new guns or abilities, like a double jump and an air dash. And then on top of all that is a cool level creator to upload and share to others. So of course most of the creations are just levels ripped straight from Doom. And it's great. If you're a fan of Doom, then Prodeus is a must. Stray is the first game made by indie devs Blue 12 Studios and is one of my favourite game worlds of the year. You play as an unnamed cat as you fall into this dystopian city inhabited by robots and these weird, deadly alien blobs, with no human life to be found. As I say, I love exploring this world and finding out its history and why everything is the way it is, all whilst you play as a cat. And you really do play like one too, scratching any rug you find and having no regard for idle paint cans. The gameplay isn't the deepest and the stealth sections can be both basic and sometimes frustrating, but Stray excels at its interesting world building, fantastic art design and charming robot inhabitants. If like me you love robots, futuristic dystopian settings and especially cats, then you really owe it to yourself to play Stray. Vampire Survivors has no right being as good as it is. At first sight, it's an ugly 2D top-down Castlevania looking wannabe. It also happens to be a roguelite, and I can't stand the tedious loop of roguelikes or lights. I just don't see the appeal in trying again and again at doing the same thing, and yet I cannot stop playing this game. I've already put nearly 20 hours into it and I don't think I'm stopping anytime soon. But in case you still don't know what it is, Vampire Survivors on the surface is a very simple survival game, where you move around and automatically attack enemies, collecting experience orbs, leveling up and stacking more and more attacks. You get a random choice of 3 options with what to upgrade with every level up, but the trick is that each upgrade and weapon can be fused when leveled up correctly, so before long you're an unstoppable god showering the screen with these crazy attacks. The fact the developer has worked on slot machines shows, because those slow dopamine drips of flashing lights with every chest you open really does work. What's impressive though is that it's not actually predatory at all, and the game is even free on mobile. There's this hidden depth which is not immediately apparent, but it keeps you coming back again and again. Just be warned if you do, because it is painfully addictive. The best way to describe Tinykin is it's basically the Toy Story 2 video game meets Pikmin. It's a 3D platformer where the levels are rooms of a seemingly abandoned house, so you'll be exploring the likes of a garage, basement, and kitchen from the perspective of an ant. In fact, most of the game's NPCs are these weird alien bug creatures, with the Pikmin element coming in with the self-titled Tinykin. Some are used to carry objects like Pikmin, as well as ones that explode on contact. Some you use to literally build bridges and ladders, and others you connect together to form an electric current. The thing is that there aren't actual enemies, so Tinykin is a very chill game where you're pretty much just collecting and discovering. There's not a huge amount of depth in terms of the platforming, as you just have a jump and an upgradable glide, but that's because the main focus is on the Tinykin themselves. I just love the way it looks. It's honestly one of the most charming games of 2022 in both presentation and how it plays. Definitely want to check out if the idea of a 3D collectathon platformer and Pikmin fused together sounds like a cool thing. Bayonetta 2 was my favourite game of 2014 and possibly my favourite Wii U game. I know some people would say that's damning with faint praise, but I loved the game. Bayonetta 3 though is such a disjointed experience in comparison to how tight of a package Bayo 2 was, but it's still one of the better games of the year. The introduction of the giant demon summons to the combat has been somewhat controversial amongst fans, but I really like them. Sure, they can sometimes feel a little clunky to use, and the camera really doesn't know where to point at most of the time, but I just love the power fantasy that they give the player, and that's really what I come to Bayonetta for. Feeling like an unstoppable badass. The new character Viola, however, she sucks, both in her as a character and playing as her. I know she's been tweaked since the game release, but I played it in the launch month and I really hated playing as her. I also wasn't a fan of the genre sections either, which wouldn't be too bad as they're labelled as side missions, but you still need to play through them to get to the next Bayo chapter, kind of negating the idea of calling them side missions. The story is also kind of whatever, but I don't really come to these games for the plot. I come to play as the badass Bayonetta, and when I get to play as her, it's awesome. As you might be able to tell, I was a little sour upon finishing this game, but since going back and learning a lot of the game's mechanics and replaying the levels I already enjoyed, ignoring the ones I didn't, I think Bayonetta 3 is one of the best pure gameplay experiences of the year. It's nowhere near as tightly focused as the previous two games in this series, but it's still a must play for the fans of the genre. Hey look, it's another Pokemon game, and as much as I commend Scarlet and Violet's pure open world design, I think Legends Arceus is a much better game for narrowing its focus with its various smaller and condensed areas. Not only do the games run and look better, but I think that it helps with the game's pacing too. This is the game I always wanted as a kid, sneaking around in the wilderness and catching wild Pokemon. I know it's not the most graphically impressive game out there, but I really like the whole watercolour look to everything, making it feel ancient and that you're in the past. Not only is it cool that you're building a Pokedex and discovering this land for the first time, but you're also building up a town. If anything, I'd like to see another Legends game go further in this direction and allow you to fully customize your town from the ground up. I might have put more hours into Scarlet, but Legends Arceus was by far a more fresh and polished package. It's actually mad to think that Splatoon 3 released over 5 years after Splatoon 2. Not only did it feel just as fresh, but it also added so much more than just new weapons and maps. See, I'm one of those weirdos where, for as much as I love Splatoon's multiplayer, it's actually the single player campaign I enjoy the most. And the third game's entry is by far the best yet. First off, the main hub world in the single player has so many improvements, making me want to keep coming back and opening up newer areas with the little fry guy. Mainly though, it's the actual levels themselves that are a joy for me. I've heard them being compared to Super Mario Galaxy's bite-sized level design of always throwing something new your way, and without spoilers, that final boss fight was incredible and something that would make even Bayonetta blush with how bonkers it is. Having said that, I still really like the multiplayer a whole lot, but I just wished I had more people I knew to play it with. I still think the map rotation thing is dumb as hell, and I won't hear otherwise, but at least there's multiple modes to choose from if you don't like a map, and also that Sun and Run is finally off the timer too. I know some people will cry foul for putting The Last of Us Part 1 on a list of 2022 games to begin with, but come on, it's way more than just a remaster. This is a full remake from the ground up and it looks incredible. My only disappointment would maybe be the lack of gameplay improvements introduced in Part 2, but all of the game's improved animations and additions like the more detailed workbenches are all here. I know it lacked the multiplayer of the original, which I'm guessing is because of the upcoming Factions game from Naughty Dog, but it does include the Left Behind DLC. If I'm being perfectly honest, I really don't care about the lack of multiplayer because this is still one of my favourite games of the last decade. I won't go into specifics or spoilers just in case you haven't played it and you don't want to potentially get spoiled with the current TV show, which by the way is also absolutely incredible. But yeah, there's not much more to say about The Last of Us that hasn't already been said, just that I love the world that Naughty Dog created and Joel and Ellie are two of the greatest characters in gaming, and Part 2 is also a masterpiece. There, I said it.
What the hell was that?
I've always enjoyed the Kirby series, but for me it's never been an A-tier franchise amongst the other Nintendo elites like Mario, Zelda or Metroid. Most of the Kirby mainline games have been fine, if rather simple platformers, which I usually forget about once I finish with them. If anything, I've actually always preferred the Kirby spin-off titles like Canvas, Curse and Epic Yarn. And yet, here is a fresh take on the series. Finally, Kirby is actually properly in 3D, and it works so well. The new abilities thanks to the new mouthful mode are fantastic, like being able to turn into a vending machine and shoot soda cans, a huge fan to propel a boat around bodies of water, and of course everyone's favourite, Kirby can be a car. I also love how you can permanently upgrade the power-ups too, so the fire breath can eventually evolve into this unstoppable fire dragon of destruction. Oh, and the entire time you're collecting Waddle Dees to populate your ever-growing hub town, and if you've been watching this video you'll know how much I love building a hub town. The Forgotten Land is up there with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and Super Mario Odyssey in terms of inventive level design. Never are two levels are the same. Even for Switch's standards, this game is so pleasant to look at. For a franchise which has been around for over 30 years, this is one of the biggest breaths of fresh air from the entire year of 2022. I just feel like the older I get, the less I want to be frustrated, lost or tired from playing a video game. But with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I had the biggest smile on my face the entire time I was playing. And for me, it's my favourite game of the year. Well, that's the end of the video, and seeing as you're at the end, thank you so much for watching, and even bigger thanks if you managed to sit through it all. I really won't blame you if you skipped around. Let me know what games I missed, because I know there's a few I didn't get around to in time, otherwise this would have been a top 50 and it would have come out in September instead. I know it feels like a long time ago now, but I would sincerely love to hear what your favourite games of 2022 are. Did you manage to play as many as 40 like me, or do you have a life? I've also got a bunch more ranking videos in the pipeline on this here channel, so please subscribe, give the video a like, and maybe a share if possible. I know you hear this kind of dross at the end of so many videos, but you have no idea how much it helps channels out, especially smaller channels like my own wanting to grow. Anyway, until next time, hope you're having a great 2023 so far. Bye!